the first couple of episodes when, I wasn't this slick podcaster, broadcaster. There are
Mm-hmm.
lots of there are lots of ahs. There
Oh,
were
I still have lots of ums and ahs in
yeah,
my.
and we all do. And I was just like, do I talk like this really? So, so
The Career Challenges Podcast, a collection of stories about overcoming professional hurdles and learning lessons the hard way. Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Kyle Werkerly, certified ghostwriter.
Welcome to the Career Challenges Podcast. My guest for this episode is Paul Padmore. And Paul is the creator of the podcast My Perfect Failure, where Paul speaks to experts on the subject of failure and also those who reveal how their failures have been critical to their successes. Away from podcasting, Paul is an experienced digital advertising professional and has worked with leading UK publishers. And more recently, Paul has transitioned away from publishers to working in the digital tech space. So, Paul, thank you very much for being on the Career Challenges podcast with me today.
Carl, thank you so much for that very eloquent introduction. And I'm super duper excited to be on your podcast.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Paul, your podcast, I guess, kind of walk me through what led you to want to do a podcast and then why you landed on the subject of failure for the topic of your podcast.
Okay, a good question. So the reason that I decided that I wanted to do a podcast was because, or to do something around failure, was because I used to, when I transitioned from, as you sort of pointed out a second ago, from working on the publisher side in the digital advertising space in London, I was working for publishers. Then I got a job working on the tech side. It was a startup, and it kind of was, initially like a really fun experience, wonderful colleagues. It was there was excitement because it was a startup, and all the enthusiasm that you would expect at the start of a journey. It was there, and then it just became a little bit more challenged as there was things that weren't working out. There were sort of some things that I had, some partners that I had sort of banked on being my revenue generators didn't quite back out. And, excuse me, and ultimately it didn't work out. The sort of the startup life that I sort of had this lovely vision of wasn't working out. And ultimately sort of, I left that business. And but while I was going through that journey of things not working out, I kept on having this thought process about the noted people that we're all aware of, like Jay-Z, J.K. Rowling, Oprah. Even if we go back to Thomas Edison, these people that repeat, MJ is another one. These people are people that repeatedly talk about failure. This hasn't worked. This hasn't worked. This hasn't worked. But ultimately, they got to a point where it did work and they found success. So I was wondering how I would do. Could I do that? That was my question. Could I replicate what they were doing? And the job didn't work out. I got another job, but I still had this reoccurring thought. And then I thought, you know what? I need to do something with this, because the thought is just there. I could be walking, I could be on a tube, I could be in a bus, I could be in a meeting even, and I'd be thinking about this process. And then I thought, you know what? I listen to podcasts. Why don't I do a podcast? I don't know anything about podcasting, apart from listening to them, but why don't I do a podcast? And it excited me. So that's kind of where it came from.
Awesome. And so to get your podcast up and going, I've seen it done multiple different ways, but when I was reading into it and I wanted to be super prepared and, come into it, quote unquote, professionally, because I'm doing this all on my own, obviously.
Wow.
I don't have a professional service doing it for me. I don't have a lot of expensive technology at my disposal here, but I'm like, I've got what I can do. I've got some stuff at my disposal that I can use, and it doesn't sound horrible, so I can I at least have that going for me. But I read up that you need to have at least 10 episodes edited and ready to go before you even launch. And then I've talked to people who they just decided to start going. They started looking for guests, and then as they were recording, they were putting it out.
Yeah.
So what camp are you into? The super organized, or it's a somewhat organized, which is where I'm at, or the more of, let's just go with it and see where it goes?
You know what? My biggest fear drove me to recording lots of episodes. So when I was looking into podcasting, I'm sure I've read it a number of times, that the average podcast lasts 7 episodes. So people have a wonderful idea, but they, may not sort of fully appreciate the level of work that's involved. Also, if you're working or you've got a family, then this takes time, so you can't just sort of suddenly, it's not always convenient just to drop everything to record an episode. So if you don't have, so I was concerned that if I didn't have a buffer, then I wouldn't be able to retain consistency. And the consistency is another thing that you read about when you're about to start a podcast. That consistency, your audience wants to know that Carl's podcast is going to come out, or Paul's podcast is going to come out every Monday or Tuesday, whatever day that is. So from my perspective, the fear of not being able to have a buffer or be consistent meant that I made sure that I had a buffer. So before I launched in July.
Yeah, I launched officially in June of this year, and I had those 10 episodes ready to go before I officially launched. And
Perfect.
It's really worked out, because now I have at least 2 months of lead time between recording and when an episode drops, which works out for me. So how does that work out for you? How much lead time do you have for your podcast?
Kind of like about similar. I launched with 3 episodes, but I had about 20 episodes done. So I've got quite a lot of sort of material there, and now I'm sort of recording more episodes and whatnot. So I've probably got material that goes into next year now, and it kind of helps because I know people that don't have that buffer, and it's kind of stressful trying to, because what it's like with guests and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Guests will be, Paul, yes, or Carl, I'm available today. Mm-hmm. And then life happens, and then they might be, well, Paul, Kyle, can we switch that to next week because something's just come into work has asked me to do this, or there's family commitments. So if you don't have that buffer, then it might compromise your consistency. But also, what's kind of I'm trying to use the buffer to help me with other things, because as you all know, the recording of the episodes is just part of it. What we want to do is grow our brands, grow our podcast. So is working on other elements such as social media, or maybe trying to speak to people in other forums. Just if you've got connections, or you don't, reach out to people and just get the the word out there, because obviously what you and I are doing is they're wonderful podcasts that are there designed to give people really just great information, really.
Yeah. And so the topic, failure for your podcast, when you approach a guest, or I guess when a guest approached you, how do people feel about that? So, some people are very open, they don't mind talking about that. But other people, I guess they're kind of timid when it comes to that, because I guess they don't want to come across as having made a mistake, or that they're inept in some way, or that maybe they may not be as skilled in their profession as they would like other people to believe. So how do you handle those kind of insecurities, or maybe hangups that your guests have?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate. A lot of the guests that I've spoken to, they're quite candid about failures or mistakes that have happened to them. Because I think what's interesting as I'm sort of coming up with these answers to kind of like making more sense. But I think because if you've experienced a failure and you come out the other end, which we all should and can, is that you understand that failure is linked to success. So they're kind of like one and the same. And these guys get it because they've navigated the journey, if that makes sense. People, but potentially that are in the middle of the start of that, they've opened up an email, which is disaster, or something's happened. They may be, I haven't had that type of guest that, is in that situation. So all the guests that I have, they've navigated the situation, or they're kind of more or less at the other end, and they kind of get it. And what's great about speaking to these guys is they're very generous in terms of, they talk about mindset, they talk about reframing, they talk about permission slips, they talk about all this really, cute and intelligent stuff that I can use, the listeners can use to help them, be normal, which is experience challenges, failures. It's normal.
Definitely. You mentioned permission slips. I'm not familiar with that one. I know the mindset and action steps, but you mentioned permission slips.
Yeah. So permission slips is I was very fortunate to speak to Beth Comstock, who was the former vice chair for at GE, and she's written a book, actually. I think it's Imagine It Forward, which is a great book. Anyway, she talks about a number of different techniques that she uses, or she has used, not only with herself but with her staff at GE and NBC, which is, if you're, I was trying to think of a good example. I don't know, say, you're at work and, you think that, okay, you're at work and there's a project coming up and you think that you've got the right skill sets to lead that particular project for your team, for your business. But invariably, to lead a project's always been done by somebody else. What Beth would encourage is give yourself a permission slip or the opportunity to speak to your boss or speak to your team and say, actually, I'd like to lead this project because I love this particular subject. I've already done a bunch of research and due diligence around this area. So I think that I'd be the ideal person to lead this particular project. And essentially what she's saying is that, just give yourself the permission to do it. You don't have to sit back. Periodically in life, it doesn't, it can be anything. It can be work. It can be, it might be, going on a date. You might, give your permission slip, give yourself a permission to, ask a girl out where you might be feeling a wee bit nervous. So kind of like that. It's sort of, giving ourselves permission.
Awesome. I hadn't heard of that, like a specific permission slip. I think that's a really cool idea.
Yeah. So unfortunately, it wasn't mine. So I have to give the kudos to Beth on that one.
That's true. Yeah, you got to give credit to where credit's due. So what else have you learned from your guests that really jumps out at you, or you think is really actionable advice?
I guess there's lots. I sort of I've spoken to a guy called Chris Doris, talks about mental toughness, which is that ability to is to reframe situations. So because it's very easy to very natural actually for when a negative situation happens to think negatively. But Chris talks about, reframing that moment into a positive moment. Imagine, if you're in a car and, somebody cut you up and, immediately we want to react, bump our, push our horn and, and it kind of like doesn't, what's that going to do for you? Ultimately, it just makes you more animated and, your heart pressure, boils. And he kind of like just reframe that and just think about, he's probably had a tough day, or they've probably had a tough day and they might have this stuff going on in their life. So he sort of is able to reframe moments, and you can do that, in any situation. There's been lots. There's been, I interviewed, at my first guest was a lovely lady by the name of Erin Baker, who's a professional coach. I think she's in Michigan, but she talked about feedback, about the value in feedback, and sometimes, I'm definitely guilty of this over the years of sort of maybe not embracing feedback. But feedback's vital. It's vital for any business to succeed, not just business, but from a personal perspective to succeed. So feedback is another one that we should embrace. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of different sort of, there's I had one recently with Harvey. I can't pronounce Harvey's surname. Forgive me, Harvey. But it's like Dooch and something, but I can't. He's a noted expert. He's got a wonderful book out. But Harvey talks is emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. So loads of different things.
Awesome. Yeah, because just some of the guests I've talked to, I didn't expect, okay, I'm going to learn something. It was more like, let's get a conversation going. And then I was surprised. Oh my gosh, I should implement this in my life, because Inga Bielinska, she was one of my first 10 guests that I had, and she works with clients from all over the globe, and different ethnic backgrounds, different religious viewpoints. And so I asked her, well, how do you handle that with your professional coaching? And she said, well, I always ask them, I'm curious about your mindset. And phrasing it that way took it from, I'm not asking really why you believe what you believe. I'm not trying to open up, this debate over, what's right, what's wrong. It's really more, what do you think about it? And it puts it into more of an objective frame. And so her clients are able to really, talk, well, I think this way about it. And she says that really helps diffuse a lot of situations, and she feels it lays the groundwork later on, because they approach each other as professionals, and not, well, I have this experience, you need to listen to me, or I'm the boss and I'm paying you, so stop talking that way. And so that blew my mind. So I'm like, I started using that almost with every guest that I asked, and other people that I work with, and even my wife. I'm like, well, I'm curious what your mindset is. And it's like, it's really opened my eyes. And then another guest I had, Jeff Munn, he's a professional coach as well, but he's really incorporating meditation into his coaching strategy with his clients. And so I asked him, well, how do you do meditation? Because I'd heard that word thrown around, and I had, a friend try and talk to me how I should do it, a specific way to do it. And I had tried, I'm like, I guess I'm just not good at meditation. And so he, like, almost literally in our recording session, he was coaching me in meditation. Wow. Like, this is great, but we need to get back to the professional side of it. And so since then, I've tried to use what he's taught me about how to stay calm and just observe the thoughts that are coming into your own brain instead of reacting to them. And so I'd like to say I've gotten better, but, maybe not as great as I could be. So, Jeff, I may be calling you later. So yeah, those little things that are, I didn't realize that and going into it. And I guess that's what's great about podcasting is you don't expect those things to happen. Mm. And so let me turn that back on you then. What are some things that you never expected to happen or to learn coming out of a podcast?
There was one I guess there's loads. It's difficult to sort of isolate ex, ex, exact things. But one lady that resonates with me, just as you've asked that question, is a lady by the name of Candice Hickman, who is an Australian lady that moved to Chicago. I think she started a sort of an urban program. I think it was called Urban Access in Chicago. Now she's navigated from Chicago to Miami, and she's got her own branding business. And what I took from her is that, I think she was an occupational therapist, and when she arrived in Chicago, those skill sets weren't transferable. Her qualifications she had in Australia weren't transferable. She shouldn't execute that profession in Chicago. So she got into urban access, then she moved to Miami. And the reason I'm mentioning her is that because I'm quite measured when I do things. I'm kind of like, there's the process. I talked about, making sure I had a buffer of episodes and whatnot. But she's very like, has an idea. Let's do it. She kind of like just, that idea is there, and she presses the go button and she executes wonderfully. And when she's got a podcast called a great podcast that is called Becoming Known. And so we're talking, and I said, okay, from the moment that you had the idea of doing a podcast to execution, what was that timeline? And her timeline was 7 days.
Oh my gosh.
So it took her a week from the idea of becoming known to live episodes was 7 days. And I was just like astounded, because mine was just like laborious, methodical, back and forth. I can't go live because of it. I'm putting all these obstacles in the way. But actually, she just, if she's got an idea, let's get it done. And from that, I just thought, wow, you can do it, because ultimately the tool, we have the tools with us. We're all human beings. We're all so capable. And I think that we invariably find the answer. So Candice, if she's listening, she taught me a lot in that episode.
Would you like to be a guest on the Career Challenges podcast? Visit careerchallengespodcast.com to find out how. And while you're there, listen to all available episodes and subscribe through Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and CastBox. More outlets are coming soon. The Career Challenges podcast is produced by me, Kyle Weckerly, and I'm a certified ghostwriter. A little bit more about that. I work almost exclusively with business authors. I've worked with authors who are coaches, consultants, mentors, speakers, some high-ticket salespeople, C-level executives, and of course, business owners. My authors have worked for USAA, Vistage, Booz Allen Hamilton, Austin Technology Council, and the John Maxwell team. They want to write a book, and they want that book to help them expand their business. See, with a book in hand, they're able to market their expertise, or secure more speaking gigs, or promote their company, or all three, or maybe even more than that. They're not out to write a bestseller, though that would be nice. Instead, they have years of knowledge and experience, and sorting it out will be no easy task. More importantly, they want all that knowledge and experience to be an engaging read. To learn more about how you can become an author, visit WeckerlyWriter.com. That's WeckerlyWriter.com, and schedule a consultation today. And now, back to the Career Challenges podcast.
Awesome. So, speaking of things learned, I always try to ask these couple questions in every episode. So, what's a lesson that you've learned the hard way in your journey with podcasting, or just in your professional career?
I guess one episode. Organization is an important, I think, aspect in any in every walk of life. So work, and podcasting. So one example would be with I had an interview scheduled with I think his name is Glenn Gare, who's from New York, a wonderful professor, I think, of psychology. And anyway, so I was at work on Friday, just finishing up, had a long week at work, thinking, what am I going to do this evening? Shall I grab a beer? That sounds like a great idea. And then I get an email in my inbox from Glenn. I think, okay, it's nice. He's probably just catching up for our episode next week. And when I looked at, I had this sort of sixth sense as I got the email. I was thinking, oh no, but anyway. So long story short, I'd got my dates wrong. So I'd entered the wrong date into my calendar. So I'd scheduled it in for the following week. And as I sort of looked at, I kind of, as I looked at my emails, I realized, bloody hell, I've got the dates wrong. Anyway, so I emailed Glenn to say, Glenn, I've made a mistake. I've got my dates wrong. Could we do maybe, could we maybe do tomorrow or maybe next week? And he was like, well, I'm going to China for like about 3 weeks. So why don't we just do it? And I was like, literally I'm thinking of, he's not getting it. Can't we do it? Anyway, so fortunately, I always do prep as you do. You do prep, so you kind of make sure that that there's prep done in advance. So I'd done prep, so I had so anyway. He was quite good because he kind of like said, Paul, let's do it. Mm-hmm. And it was great because the lesson that I learned was to make sure that I sync calendars correctly. So that hasn't happened since. Mm-hmm. But also I got another rich lesson from the experience was that you can do things on the go. Mm-hmm. It was a wonderful episode, but I felt sort of rewarded from the fact that it was a great episode and I thoroughly enjoyed it, but also the fact that I did it not in my normal methodical way. It was like Glenn was like, Paul, let's just do it now. Mm. And, I had to sort of overcome fear to do that, which is kind of like the theme of the podcast, really. So I had definitely a rewarding experience from doing that, but I won't be doing that again. So make sure that I sync everything. So I don't do it on autopilot.
True. And that reminds me of another one. I had another guest who I felt like he had ghosted me, where he just didn't show up. Well, come to find out he didn't put it in his calendar. And so I need to start doing more where I send reminders. Yeah. Whereas you were great. You emailed me, once or twice over this last week to make sure we were still confirmed. And I was like, that's great. So he's on the same page. Yeah. But there's been people who are like, oh, we're having a meeting right now. I'm like, yes, you agreed to this.
Yeah.
You filled out the thing and you said you wanted to be here. So I need to start doing that as well. Just sending reminders so that, they know, and, it makes me look professional as well. But yeah, that's a lesson I learned the hard way too. And also because, I record through Zoom, this is a Zoom meeting we're doing right now. It's recording for me. But there's a specific way to sign into that. And so it's easy to have that invitation lost though. So I've gotten into the habit of sending like 2 or 3 different copies of it to my guests in different ways, like either through the calendar or their email, and making sure that they have it, so that way when it comes time they can just dial right in, and we don't have to worry about it. So
totally. I think is like you're great at that communication, because, like we were saying before, that people just get so immersed in their everyday lives that we as podcasters sometimes people just you might go to periphery a little bit. And so it's good to do what you do, which is, the emails,
Mm-hmm.
reminders.
Yeah. And so what's a hurdle you've overcome? That's another question I like to ask too.
In sort of podcasting or in sort of work, professionally work?
Either one. I mean, I'm all about stories, man.
Okay. So hurdles that I've overcome. I think maybe sort of maybe from a work perspective. Obviously, when I worked at a startup and that didn't go according to plan, that was kind of like quite a huge blow, because we'd all put so much, effort, work, hope, and dreams, aspirations. Everything was sort of, put into that. So it was when it didn't work out. I think it was. You have to give yourself a minute just to sort of, just to sort of be down for a little bit. But then I think it's important that once you've had that moment, that you realize that there are lots of other amazing opportunities out there. And started reaching out to people, managed to get another job, and because I think when failures happen, they can be so traumatic that you just think that you're awful at this stuff, you're awful at that, and you don't. And that at that moment, you don't think that you can't think of anything else apart from that. But we're all so and that's why I want to do the podcast, because failure, success, they're so interlinked, and you can overcome everything, but it's just knowing that it's just so the reward for me from that failure was my perfect failure, because if I hadn't had that experience at the startup, then I wouldn't be speaking to you today. I wouldn't have recorded 30 plus podcasts. I wouldn't have just had so many wonderful conversations. I wouldn't have listened to all these people like you and all these other wonderful contributors. So out of failure, there's so much richness and goodness that exists, and I think it's kind of the reward is making people aware of that, so they kind of embrace the opportunity to grow.
Awesome. That's a great story. Yeah, it reminds me of, I was part of a startup as well. I was writing content for them, and I felt I'd finally found, that job that really worked for me. But, 4 months later, they said, well, we've run out of money for your position.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to let you go. So I was laid off, and, it sent me reeling. And but if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have finally found the confidence or the need really to launch my own podcast, because I had been kicking it around for a while. And there was always a good reason, quote unquote reason for not doing it, until I finally was like, let's just do it. I've got the means. It's a great way to connect with people. Let's just go ahead and do it. And so now, here I am talking with you all the way from Basingstoke. Is that
Basingstoke.
Basingstoke.
Yeah, we want to get Basingstoke on the map globally.
There we go.
Basingstoke wants to become global.
There we go. And where's Basingstoke exactly?
It's in Hampshire. It's like it's about 45 minutes from London.
45 minutes from, all right.
So we're not too far away from the capital. So so not so that's what a funny thing. So as I was saying to you before, I was born in London but raised in Basingstoke. So I sort of pivot between both places. But obviously everybody knows of London, but not that many people know of Basingstoke. So so definitely shout out to Basingstoke.
And a lot of people know London. Obviously, it's a very global city. Whereas San Antonio, because I'm based out of San Antonio, I feel we're not getting credit, because people think of the U.S. and they think of either New York, L.A., or maybe Washington D.C. They don't really think of Texas. They think of Texas as this own thing, and it really is. When I moved here when I was 17, it really was that shock for me that, oh my gosh, this isn't this isn't like California. These people are different.
Yeah.
It's a good thing, actually, because I found the people here were more genuine. They were, they really cared. They would wave at you. They would be kind, just because that was their way. And I'm like, well, that's great. And so it really warmed up. I really warmed up to this place, and I really enjoyed it. But I feel that San Antonio specifically just is not getting its due.
Yeah.
In the global space, because we're south of Austin, and Austin is seen as this kind of burgeoning tech hub, because there's a lot of tech startups going to Austin as opposed to Silicon Valley, because it's cheaper and there's more opportunity in Austin. They're just not very organized. Whereas I'm like, San Antonio, oh, we've got all these people here. We could do it. We could do it here. And of course, we have the San Antonio Spurs. And the last time they won a championship, which was back in 2014, they had the most international players on a team ever.
Oh, wow.
And like, nobody was paying attention to that. Nobody was bringing that up. Instead, they're all like, well, I think we had beat, the Cavaliers. And everyone was like, well, it was the Cavaliers who lost. They just weren't doing it. I'm like, no. Spurs focus on that. And, we're not getting the respect. Yeah. And so, obviously I have an opinion about that. But I need to rein myself in here before I go too crazy anyway.
Well, I like basketball. So, so I'm definitely going to be rooting for San Antonio now. So you converted me.
Thank you. So what's basketball like there in the UK?
You know what, the UK. I'm not an aficionado within the UK, so I'm probably not best placed to answer that question. But what I guess I could say is that it's a million miles away from the NBA in terms of the sort of prestige and in terms of the coverage that it gets. I don't even know from recollection if because we do get NBA in the UK. I watch that periodically when it's on sort of early enough because of the time difference. But I can't recall ever seeing any English or even European guys.
Well, there was
basketball.
Just on that San Antonio team, Marco Bellinelli. He's from Italy. We had a couple Latvian guys.
Okay,
I can't remember. And then we had Boban. I can't remember his last name. He was Ukrainian or Serbian or something.
Yeah. And
so we had a lot of people like that. And then, of course, we had Manu Ginobili from Argentina, and so some other South American players on the team as well. And then all the way from Australia, Patty Mills, Australian player. And so, we've got people from all over, but I do remember some specific people from Europe, specifically Spain. Oh, Tony Parker. How could I forget? Tony Parker from France. He was our point guard, and he just recently retired, sadly. So
Tony Parker.
Yeah, our big three is gone now, and so I worry about our team that we won't be able to compete against the other big guys yet. But I don't know much about sports, so that's all I do know.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of in the UK. It's mainly football, or soccer, and cricket is kind of like gets a bit of coverage. Rugby, but football is that's hands down the most popular sport. So that's just like one everywhere.
So what's your football team? The only teams I really know are was it Manchester United, Arsenal? I think that's it. I think that's it. There's just those teams. And the only reason I know those is because my uncle lived in the UK for a while, and he was a big Arsenal fan. So he's got Arsenal stuff everywhere, all over his house.
Well, most of my family support Arsenal. I'm sort of the odd one out. I like Arsenal, but I don't. I kind of like go and watch them sometimes. But the team that I follow, and it kind of, the linkage is where I grew up in Basingstoke. So putting Basingstoke on the map again is a team called Southampton, who are sort of about 30 miles down the road from Basingstoke. So because of the proximity, they were the team that are the team that I support. They're in the top division, which is what we call the Premier League, or Premiership. I forget which one it is now, but football is such a it's one of those things that when your team loses, it kind of like compromises you. Yours. I'm not as bad as I was actually. When they lose, it kind of affects your Saturday a little bit because you're just thinking, why did they lose that game?
Mm.
How did they lose? How did they miss all those chances? I kind of have taught myself to become more measured about winning and losses with them, because as long as I don't get relegated, I'm fine.
Yeah. So have you been able to talk to somebody from Southampton to come on your show and talk about their failures and how they can learn from it, so that way your Saturday isn't bummed out?
Yeah, that'd be some long episodes. You know what? I haven't actually, but that's quite a good idea. That's quite a good idea. I haven't actually connected to anybody on the sporting arena, but definitely that would be a good idea. Somebody from Southampton would be particularly nice, because obviously that's my team. So no, but if I do, you'll be in the footnotes because you would have inspired that one.
Thanks. I was also trying to bring it back around to the topic here, because we got off on the tangent, but that's great.
Yeah,
that's great. So
you know what I wanted to ask you?
Oh, sure.
Something around your ghostwriting.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can, because that sounds really interesting to me.
Yeah. So ghostwriting, I've loved stories. I grew up watching a lot of TV. I grew up reading books. And I did write a couple books and self-publish them.
Oh, wow.
And since I'm not known as a best-selling author, I think it's obvious that they didn't do well. But I had a couple agents who took interest in it, but it was something I really enjoyed doing. And so instead of having like those failures, you mentioned learning from your failure, instead of letting those failures deter me from going into to publishing and writing, I'm like, well, what can I learn from this? How can I actually do it better, so that way I can produce a viable book? And that's what led me into ghostwriting, because at first I was doing content writing on the side, trying to get that up and going. And I learned that you actually can get into ghostwriting without years of experience in the publishing industry, because there's a course here taught through University of California State University at Long Beach. And
Okay.
It's specifically about ghostwriting, teaching you a mindset, a methodology, all of that. It's a year-long course. And I'm like, let's do this. I'd spoken with other ghostwriters. Derek Lewis, he's a big ghostwriting aficionado here, and he's got this following, and he's growing in popularity. And I talked with him, and he's like, if you want to get into it, into ghostwriting, you have to take this course. It will give you so much more advantage speaking to clients, knowing how to handle those kinds of projects. And so I went through the course, and I think almost half of the people who started the course with me either dropped out, they just couldn't handle the workload, or just time, because you do spend a lot of time writing. I was doing almost 20 hours a week just writing for the assignment.
That's commitment.
Yeah, and I wondered if I was cut out for this as well, but Claudia Suzanne, and she is the authority on ghostwriting. She has done it for years. She knows all the ins and outs. And so she has that methodology, and that's what she was teaching us, was her own specific process for approaching a ghostwriting project. And my first assignment that I got, I was so nervous. All I really did was just move some words around on the page, and I said, that's it. And she came back, she's like, this is crap. So you need to not do that. You need to actually apply yourself, because when a client is handing you their book to write, they're trusting you. It's this relationship that you have. It's professional, obviously, but still they're trusting you to take their story and to help them turn it into something viable. And it's an intimate thing, because it's their thoughts, their ideas, their life experience, and they're putting it in your hands. So it is your responsibility to do a good job. And this assignment obviously was not a good job. So you need to go back and actually do a good job on this. Yeah. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, I'm terrible at this. But at the same time, it's like this is my chance to really do it and to see if I have what it takes. And I turned it in, and she said, this is good. It's not great. It's better. It's better. And I see a lot of potential. You're listening. You're applying what we've learned. And that's really what we want. great. Yes. And then we got an assignment later, about 2 or 3 assignments later, and I wrote something up. We had discussed it in class. Okay, this is what the author's trying to do. What is he missing in his work? And I pointed out, well, what he's really missing is that, because the story was he was a success, but he really wanted to get away from his parents, and so he worked really hard to get away from his parents. But he didn't mention that in his story at all. And so I put in 1 or 2 lines about that just really quickly as you read through. And she caught that and she said, that's what we needed. That's what really made this work sing. And I this is probably the best interpretation of this work that I've seen, because she gives out the same assignments to every student. So she's seen the same, the same work reimagined about, a million times. And she's like, this is the best I've seen of this. And I was like, oh my gosh, there we go.
That's amazing.
And so I felt really inspired and emboldened, and there was my confidence. And so I decided to go off into to ghostwriting then. So I'm working on that now. It's still not to the point where I can do it full time, but also part of this podcast is to really get the word out there as well too. So
yeah, totally.
Double-edged sword, I guess I should say, on that.
And sort of so when you it's so interesting. So when you are ready to sort of, I did say hypothetically do it for full time, would you reach out to do you reach out to people? How would somebody find you that would need your services to ghostwrite? Do they find you, or you find them, or a bit of both?
Well, I can pitch them, but I find that if they're interested enough to come find me, that's the best situation.
Yeah,
they want to do it. If I have to convince them to do it, I'm going to essentially be dragging them through the project. And that's not good, because if they're not inspired, if they don't have that conviction, it's going to show up on the page and the book's going to fall flat. So even if we do finish the project, people are going to be like, well, it's not really a good book. There may be some value in it. It's just like, I don't want to read this. We want a book that people want to read. And when your author is passionate about a subject, cares a lot, and has that conviction, even if it's something as dull and boring as elk. I always use that example because my dad studied elk. They're the most boring animal in my opinion, but he studied them for years, and he wrote a book about it, and he published it. But you can see that he cares a lot, because there's, anyway, you got to read the book to figure out why he cares. I don't know why after 30 years. But when they have that conviction and you're working with them, I can feed off of that, and I can work with that to put the words on the page that people want to read. So it's best if they want that. And so what I'm trying to do is get my website and the SEO to the point to where when somebody types in, ghostwriter, business or something like that, my name will be at the top of the list on Google searches. And it's getting there. It's not great. Yeah. I probably should be hiring somebody to do it. But of course, like I said, I'm not really in a position to do that now.
It takes time, and the organic process. There's a lot to be said for that.
Mm-hmm. True. So what I'm really trying to do is get my website top notch, because doing a podcast is great and getting it out there, and it helps. But what I've learned, especially from Derek Lewis and then another ghostwriter, Latham Shinder, is that when your website is just immaculate and the SEO is really good and you're scoring on high on these Google searches, that's when the clients are really coming to you.
Yeah.
And where I would like to be is where Derek and Latham are, is where they're full of clients. Last time I talked with Derek, he said he's got at least a year and a half planned out of just client work. I'm like, that's great. I would love to be there. That's where I want to be. So that's my goal right now.
Okay. So if you're, excuse me all my questions around this, because that sounds so interesting, but
no problem.
How long would it, I guess it would vary. I'm thinking when you start working with a client, I guess you'll take a look at what they're looking to do, and that would give you a gauge of how long that particular project would take. Is that how it works? Or
well, part of the process is consultation. They'll approach me and say, I've got a book, I've got this great idea. Well, let's sit and talk about it. And based on what they tell me, I'll go back and do some research. Well, if we want to write a book about this, we'll have to do this much work. How long will that amount of work take, and then come back to them with a timeline.
Mm.
Tell them, okay, well, and usually the average is 6 months. So I always start with kind of 6 months in my mind, and so sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. And then come back to them and say, okay, this is as close as I can estimate it, because I can't see the future. Close as I can estimate it, your project's going to take 6 months. And so then the cost will be this much because you have, the time and effort that we have to put into it. And so, what do you think going forward? And sometimes we'll negotiate. And, what I've also seen is at that point, people decide, well, maybe I'm not as thrilled about writing a book as I used to be, because they see the price tag and they see the amount of work that has to go into it. But others are like, oh, okay, well, maybe we can work out some sort of agreement to where, a reduced fee for cover credit, something like that. So, you got to be open to that give and take. And one guy actually came up to me and said, well, can we do it at half speed? Can we do this just part-time? And so the fee would still be the same, but it would be paid out over a much longer period of time. And so I was like, okay, if that's how you really want to do it, I'll work part-time on this and you work part-time on that. And, hopefully that'll work better for your schedule.
Okay. Sounds really interesting and a super undertaking. And also like a lot of responsibility, because you're kind of like capturing the essence of who they are and putting that into a lovely sort of book for them. So it sounds like a great sort of undertaking.
Yeah, and a lot of it is conversations just like this. We get on a Zoom call. I start talking to them. I'm really trying to draw out stories from them. I'm trying to really hear their innermost thoughts and narratives. And then I transcribe that, which I don't do for podcasts. I just don't have the time to do it.
Yeah.
But that transcription process, as tedious as it is for me, and at first I hated it, but now I see the value in it, because essentially I'm listening to each recording about 3 times over so I can really get the words down. And that puts it into my mind, their speech patterns, their talk, how they talk, and their stories, and I really get to know their stories. And I feel that really gives me that ability to write from their perspective. Because Liv Howland, she was one of the TAs. She's another ghostwriter, and she does great work too. She explained it that when you're ghostwriting for somebody, it's easy to say I'm writing a book for them. But what you're really doing is you're that actor embodying the role. So they obviously don't have time to be an author. So you're taking on the role as an actor. This author, is a great titan of industry. He or she knows how to do all these things. They have all that skill. They just lack that author ability or the time to really put in the effort to be a good author. So you're kind of taking on that role of being that titan of industry, having all that experience, and being an author and having the time to really work and develop your story. So you're being in this actor, you're embodying a role. And so a lot of that conversation and transcription is that research. And then of course you're going to write it and you're going to give it to them and they're going to say, well, I don't like this part. I don't like that part. And that's part of the process as well. And all that editing. So you can get that role done well.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. It's, like a wonderful process, a lot of work. So definitely take my hat off to you.
Thank you. And so for you and your podcast, My Perfect Failure, I guess what is one of the biggest takeaways you've had throughout this whole process?
I guess it's a continued growth, because there's always something to do. Mm-hmm. There's always something to learn. The learning continues. There's I guess you with your podcast, I'm sure that just when you think that because I guess my idea is to grow it and to get it out there so people become familiar with My Perfect Failure and what it is, and what is here to do, and in order to get to that point where it becomes, I'm a long way from that, but the idea is that I need to continue learning. Mm-hmm. I need to continue growing. Mm-hmm. I need to continue taking feedback, and so it's a continued process. So I just need to keep on going with it, because the learning continues via every episode. I learn skills about, embracing the idea of things not going the way that I want them to. That's why the first couple of episodes, when I wasn't this slick podcaster, broadcaster, there are lots of there are lots of ahs.
I still have lots of ums and ahs in mind.
and we all do. And I was just like, do I talk like this really? so it's kind of understanding. I think what I've learned from the process is not to be too hard on myself, accept my shortcomings, and I know that that from my shortcomings there's huge growth. So I would encourage your listeners, who people that are listening, that shortcomings are part of the process. So part of the process.
Yeah.
And part of the process is growth.
Yeah. True. So what's next for you and My Perfect Failures podcast?
So pretty much that is continue speaking to wonderful people like you, more wonderful guests, more learning, and just, as I say, get it out there into the mainstream, because we're just sort of kicking into September, so been live for under 2 months. I've had huge fun during the process. So I guess ultimately what I want is for going back to what I spoke about earlier, to get people to appreciate that success, failure, same thing. Don't get bogged down if things don't go your way. Just take the learnings out of those situations, and it will make you even better than you possibly dreamed you could be. So so keep on pushing the Basingstoke, clearly, and My Perfect Failure. So that's it.
Awesome. Well, Paul, thank you so much for being on the Career Challenges podcast with me today.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. It's been fantastic. Love what you're doing. Wonderful to learn about ghostwriting and of course San Antonio Spurs. I'll be following them.
Yes, definitely.
This season. Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Oh, and if people wanted to listen to your podcast, where can they find you?
Well, so I've got a website, which is www.myperfectfailure.com. So all current live episodes are available on that. If people want to connect, I've also got an Insta handle, which is at PADS MPF. So that's Pads MPF.
Awesome.
So thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.
And enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you have a fantastic day.
Thank you for listening to the Career Challenges podcast. Visit careerchallengespodcast.com to listen to more episodes and subscribe. And don't forget to schedule a consultation to talk about your book today by visiting weckerlywriter.com. That's WECKERLYWRITER.com.